Okay. Welcome everyone to today's episode of Restoring the Sciences. This is a webinar that's sponsored by the National Association of Scholars. Our guest today is Randy Wayne, who is Associate Professor of Plant Science at Cornell University. He is head of the Laboratory of Natural Philosophy, which I think encapsulates nicely what Randy Wayne's approach to science and education is. He is, in my view, what I might call a professor's professor. That is, his interests are wide-ranging, ranging from quantum mechanics and general relativity to poetry and poetry of science. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get into some of that broad scale of approaches to science there. But when I say he's a professor's professor, he's one of the few left, I think, who realizes that students don't spend tens of thousands of dollars to come to a university because of the administrators. They come for the professors, and the proper role of administration is to serve the faculty rather than the other way around. So welcome, Randy, to Restoring the Sciences, and we're awfully glad that you're here.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm also very glad I'm here.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the provocative quotes that I found, not only from you, but also about you. For example, one of the things that in your Wikipedia page says that you have strong views, which is, I think, a euphemism on the meaning of a college education. I'm sure we'll get into that. But one of the intriguing quotes I came across was that you assert that the university should be a marketplace of ideas rather than reflecting the ideas of a marketplace. I wonder if you could reflect on that a little bit.
Our culture is truly, the human culture is truly beautiful. There's so much to see and so much to explore. And my students come here, and most of them want to be physicians. And I ask them, why do you want to be a physician? And they say, I don't know. And I say to them, if that's what everybody says, because nobody continues the conversation. You say, I want to be a physician. That's the end of the conversation. What would people say if you said you want to be a ditch digger? And they say, why? And being a physician should be at least as interesting as being a ditch digger. So I want to tell them how to develop conversations with people and practice those conversations, and what skills go into being a doctor, what they should know. And so I'm building this up with, I want each individual to know what skills they believe makes a good doctor, and how Cornell can provide those skills, the resources that they can develop those skills. And those skills often go into knowing things about anatomy, physiology, knowing how to talk with people, knowing that if some of your patients are going to be musicians, maybe you don't want to know a little bit about music, or a little bit about art if some of your patients are going to be artists. And we just talk about the world. And then they're very excited to be a doctor, and they can't wait to tell somebody they want to be a doctor and practice that discussion.
Yeah, so it's one of the themes that runs through a lot of your writings is that we not only have to teach what's new in a field, but we also have to teach people what's old in the field. And And the typical survey course, as you know, is a fairly dry recitation of what we know about these things, but with rarely any focus on how we come to know these things and how we think about them, and the importance of how we think about things in terms of conceiving forming our conception of the world, and basically conceptions of our professions. And so you explore this quite a bit in some of your coursework. In Light and Life, I believe you go all the way back to the Socratics. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
One thing I realized I did yesterday in this class is I tell the students they're actually older than they think. So, for example, I was talking about circadian rhythms and the sleep-wake cycle, and I talked about Erwin Buning. And I said, actually the person I worked for in Japan as a postdoc, Masashi Tozawa, was a student of Erwin Buning. So it's only 3 steps away for them. And we do that often. When I first met Nina Stromgren Allen at Wake Forest, she told me her father was Bent Stromgren, who was an astronomer. And Einstein used to come to her house. And so as soon as she told me that, I just touched her. So then I tell my students when I show Bent Stromgren, when I talk about how he got Hans Bethe interested in figuring out how the sun made energy, and Hans Bethe was a Cornell professor. I tell them that story, and then I touch one of my students and say, so, you're not that far away from Einstein. You're much older than you think. And that's one way that I bring history that I just realized yesterday that I do. And but I want them to know how we know what we know, and that science is a human enterprise, and humans do it. Humans have wonderful qualities. Humans make mistakes. So the more they know about human nature, the more they can understand science.
Yeah, this is part of the kind of troubling dynamic, really, in modern higher education, isn't it? Because one of the things that we have seen, very pernicious tendency, I think, is that administrators and deans and whatnot don't think that faculty are capable of imparting knowledge to the students who are under their training. So graduate education, for example, is very much of a guild mentality there. It's almost a family kind of a thing, which you've alluded to with the ancestry of students to their academic forebears or academic ancestors, if you want. And somehow administrators have taken it upon themselves to come in and break that relationship up. And do you have any thoughts or observations on that?
I actually, yeah, I do. I think it goes back to when Stanford was caught with their hands in the cookie jar when it came to using indirect costs. And from then on, the funding agency said that everybody has to say exactly what they're doing with their grant money. So when I was a graduate student, which was before that time, I could come up with my own project, completely my own project. And
after you're expected to, right?
You were expected to, that's right. And it was fun, it was joyous, it was frustrating, it was just wonderful doing science. And now it's fraud to not do exactly what's already on the grant. So the students come truly to be technicians. And very rarely do they say, this is what I'm doing. In fact, never. It's so rare, it's never. And you hear people described by the lab they're in. It's this administrative unit without individuals actually doing science. So it's no wonder the administrators just look at these things as just units. From their perspective, it's probably units that bring in grant money, which has gone completely different from indirect costs to F&A. I mean, The same thing, yeah, it's follow the money. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, so I just trace it back to the original mishandling of money by universities. And this was an unintended consequence of preventing fraud.
Yeah. So what do you think administrators' motivations are in this? I mean, why do you think that administrators feel they have the power to be able to do that? And why do they actually have the power? Why have we ceded our authority as autonomous faculty to administrators? Why does that happen? That's just a fascinating story in the history of modern science, I think.
So I can say you don't have to cede your soul to the administrators. There's only two costs: promotions and raises. And I've accepted that. And I have a wonderful wife that also accepts that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy, and Amy and I aren't raising kids that need to go to college and all that. So all I want to say is it's possible to not just play the game.
Yeah. So you mentioned indirect costs a few seconds ago, just for the benefit of our audience. Could you tell us what you mean by that?
Oh, since I don't have any grants, I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but the percentage is over 50% of any money you apply for a grant to do research. Greater than 50% goes to the university. And supposedly it goes to lights and heat and electricity for your equipment, but I imagine a lot of the administrative bloat is funded by indirect costs.
Yeah. So just to put some real numbers on that, if you have a grant for $100,000 per year, for example, there'll be an additional surcharge of more than 50% that's tacked onto that a scientist never sees. It never goes into supporting the actual research. The claim, of course, is that that is money that the university, to reimburse the university for charges for the cost of having a research program. And as you say, it's very, very high. I think on average it's about 53 or 54% right now charged on the actual cost of doing research. And in some places it's up in the high 70s or even into the 90s. So if you have, for example, a $100,000 grant, the university will tack on an additional $90,000 surcharge on that. And of course, money is power, and that may be one of the reasons why administrators think they can take a high hand to faculty who are actually the reasons for existence of the university. Have you seen that kind of thing?
Yes, but I want to say, when I came here and I interviewed, somebody named Parther took me around, and I said, what a nice department. Just people really get along. And if I'm not the right person, so be it, because this is just such a great department. And what he said to me, usually in a university, the people who had the most grant money are the people that just call all the shots.
Yeah.
And actually, I believe that to be true. But I want to say, so Parther told me, Andre Jagendorf and Roger Spanswick, two people of our department, have the most money, but they were such gentlemen, they would never think of using that power over everybody else, and they didn't. And it provided a wonderful environment. So that's something, too, that people can make a choice to use their money as power or not.
Yeah. But of course, administrators are really all about power. And so if they have that money in their hands, and they're going to exert power. And And it is true, you hope for a science ethic, if you will, where the people who have the most money will not lord it over those who have less money, and that's always been a tradition in the university. But that I think reflects your aphorism that the university should be a marketplace of ideas rather than ideas of the marketplace, and so, ideas of the marketplace, that's reflected pretty clearly in things like a pharmaceutical company, for example, funding research in a university lab that's going to be relevant to their development of new drugs and things like that. And those kinds of ideas of the marketplace that's been a longstanding issue. But one of the big problems in the massive expansion of government funding of science is that now the ideas of the marketplace include some rather pernicious ideas. Among them, for example, that faculty are not capable on their own to be able to build the next generation of scientists. We see this in some of the more egregious aspects of the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda coming into the universities, and it's kind of a tragic thing, because what you're really doing there is you're getting in and rather explicitly undermining the very reason that the university exists. And you have seen that going on at Cornell University, haven't you?
Oh, I have. So actually, you brought up 2 points. I want to say one thing about doing research on things that are interesting to the marketplace. So again, that goes back to when Boyer and Cohen in the 90s figured out how to make E. coli produce insulin, and Stanford made so much money. Mm-hmm. So the university, I think, when I came here, had a healthy respect for scientists, professors, teaching, research, extension. But after Stanford made so much money due to the genetic engineering of E. coli to make insulin, things changed. And omics became the thing in the university, which is particularly interesting because Roderick coined the word omics to take the academic sound out of biology. He wanted to rid biology of the logos, which means words or meaning, reason, and the university just went all into omics. And truly, they lost words. In terms of DEI, we know that for sure. Words have no meaning anymore. And so, yeah, it applies to both research and to DEI.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about this intriguing comment you just made about wanting to purge the logos from biology? That's a fascinating idea.
I can't describe anything better than to describe the history of biology after 1992 or so. Although the journal Omics, if I remember right, came out in 1987.
Yeah, just to clarify what we mean by omics, there's this tendency of biologists to move from an utterly reductionist approach to what life is. If you know the detailed stereochemistry of DNA, you know everything that you need to know about life. Whereas omics is actually kind of a more inclusive, to use that word, approach to biology. So you treat everything the gene does as genomics. You treat everything that the protein environment of the cell does as proteomics, and you get the proliferation of these omics. I even see reference to words like metabolomics, and so, coming back to, with that clarification, coming back to this issue of removing the words from biology, how do you think omics has been removing the logos from biology? That's just a fascinating idea.
Oh, so Okay, so logos, meaning and reason. So it goes back to what is science? And Erwin Chargaff would describe science as the application of reason, and particularly logic, logos, to the study of nature, which makes the human brain the most important scientific tool, which makes the individual the most important unit of science. So we want to scientifically look at the world using logos, using reason. And so we do an experiment and we compare a control to an experimental treatment. And then you realize it's messy. So you have to say, oh, I got to do this with the lights off for some reason. Or I have to do this at a certain temperature. Or there's a circadian rhythm. I have to do this at a set time. So there's all these controls you have to do just to make the experiment reproducible, understandable, and working. And so George Gamow has this saying, 1, 2, 3, infinity. Once you're looking at more than 3 free variables, you might as well be looking at nothing, because you're looking at, you can't do the controls for them. You just can't do the controls to feel that you're competent in understanding the data. And omics decides it's going to look at everything. So it looks at every gene, every protein, every metabolite, every ion, every lipid, whichever omic it happens to be. And I don't think, so it's interesting in terms of its relationship to DEI, because the omics people say we want to be unbiased. That's why we're looking at everything. Well, bias is just another name for knowledge. That says, we know we should be looking here. We may be wrong because we're fallible. But we're going to take this hypothesis and we're going to test it while searching for truth. None of us know the truth. So it's a way to, piece by piece, search for that truth. When the omics people say we're going to look at every gene, and they say it, this is old technology, but it's easy to explain, use a chip to put all the different genes in. Well, it turns out that the genes that are put on the edge of the chip act differently than the genes put in the center. So the technology itself has bias in it. So you have to know where all bias comes from, whether it's you, the technology, and all. And by looking at all bias, it really helps if you keep the number down to 3.
Yeah. So I quite like the Niels Bohr's definition of science as the gradual stripping away of all prejudices, and this kind of broadens the scientific approach that people have, away from the traditional experimental method that you see in science fairs, hypothesis, experiment, results, typically focused on a controlled variable. And I'm not, my criticism of omics is I'm not quite sure you can separate that from all of life, which is a unitary phenomenon, really, that has multiple dimensions to it, much beyond the molecular, much even beyond the cell, and even beyond the organism itself. So
I couldn't agree with you more. So to tell the people that don't know about omics, it started out as genomics with the Human Genome Project, and a few other model organisms from different classes of living organisms. And people would say, when we know the whole sequence of the human genome, we'll know what it means to be human. And, well, we know the whole sequence. Period. Yeah. And then once they found out that, we don't understand what it means to be human because from just knowing the genes, they say, we have to know the genes that are transcribed. So then they looked at the transcriptome.
Yes, that's right.
And then they said, oh, but some of those messenger RNAs don't show up as final products, so we got to look at the proteome. Well, the proteome reacts to what ions are in the cell, so that's the ionome, and of course to the metabolites, which is the metabolome, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's looking at everything in the most reductionist way,
Yeah.
unconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't actually see it as a great way to do science. I'm definitely in the minority here. I guess you too.
But it's the latest shiny object for funders, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It's I've been told that if I want to play the game to get raises and promotions, omics is the only game in town.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, this gets to the interesting issue of promotions and tenure, which is Stephen Turner and Daryl Chubin, for example, have a very penetrating analysis of the dynamics of modern science and how it's changed. And just to encapsulate what they have said, science traditionally had been motivated by an ethic of discovery. That is, you find out new things about nature, no matter where that knowledge comes from, objective knowledge of nature. And what we have right now is an ethic of production, where you're judged by numbers of papers, number of grant dollars, all the kinds of things that we have been speaking of. And you find various examples of people who have come up in this ethic of discovery issue. Stephen Higgs, I think, was the latest. He said, he mentioned in the modern university, I would never be able to even get a position, never mind being able to get promoted in our current system, because all things are measured by these kinds of metrics of scientific productivity, which is a very odd concept if you think about it. The whole point of having a university and academic freedom is to give people the freedom to take risks, to take time, and all those sorts of things. And that seems to be going away for some reason. Well, I think I know the reason. It's because there's too much money flowing through science, which really only empowers administrators rather than faculty.
With things that you said before, I agree with you that the problem is too much money. Yeah. And one of my heroes is George Stokes, and he said, if you give him the sun and a couple pence, and he can do any experiment.
Yeah.
And I build all my own equipment. I'm sorry that this couldn't be in person, because I would have had you do an experiment with me.
Oh, darn.
And, I get everything from Agway and Kinney Drugs or Joanne's Fabrics, and put it together, and I enjoy building things. One of my friends and colleagues said, we all grew up fixing our own bikes, and you just knew how to do stuff. Yeah. And people don't grow up fixing their own bikes anymore. And then when it comes to science, you got to just buy what's out there. And interesting that pretty much what you can buy is what already works. So it's not, you're essentially not going to make a discovery. If you want to make a discovery, you have to create the thing that's going to measure what hasn't been measured before. Yeah,
I certainly agree with that. I mean, in my own work, studying basically the social physiology of termite colonies, the kinds of questions are fairly simple physiological questions. Where does air go? How do gases move, and things like that. And there's no off-the-shelf equipment for doing things like that. I also have had to learn how to make my own equipment and electronics and machining and all those other kind of things, which is part of the joy of science, really. But it's not really rewarded in this scientific ecosystem, if you will. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we've lost that?
Because of the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll build larger and larger facilities in universities, and they want people to use those facilities, and everybody has to use essentially the same techniques because they're using the same facilities, and it brings in an awful lot of money. Omics brings in an awful lot of money. Back when I was writing grants, $100,000 would be a huge grant. Not now a year. Not now. I mean, 3 years.
Yes.
and now it's millions of dollars a year for doing omics.
Yeah. So let's get into the modern, well, you said in several of your writings that the ethos of the university has been changing dramatically, and some of the things you've said in your writings is that we're in a postmodern era right now, a postmodern era where administrators are empowered more than faculty, and you've had some rather personal and up close encounters with trying to reverse this philosophy that seems to be taking over all of our universities and very rapidly.
Okay, I'm in the School of Integrative Plant Science, and on our website it says that we perpetuate slavery. I don't believe we do, and I wrote to the associate director of DEI and said, I don't believe this is true. I don't think it's, actually, I want to get what I wrote to her, and if I can find it.
While you're looking, Randy, let me just mention to the audience, we have some questions coming in the chat. That's great. We're going to get to those. But if you can, please put them in the Q&A box, because that gives us some interactivity that we don't really have in the chat. So we will get to those as soon as we go to the Q&A, but please do direct questions towards the Q&A rather than to the chat. So thank you to all.
So I wrote, I do not, so it says, SIPS recognizes that our institution was founded on and perpetuates various injustices. These include settler colonialism, indigenous dispossession, slavery, racism, classism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, anti-Semitism, and ableism. And I wrote, I do not believe that these sentences I have put in bold are true. If you believe that these statements are fact and not fiction, true and not false, would you please provide me with your evidence so that I will too believe what is factual and truthful? And then she wrote back, I'll just cut to the chase here. We can talk about the role of mindset in building an inclusive culture and perhaps find some shared values that are not about fact or fiction, true or false, but about recognizing the role we can each play in ensuring an equitable future for ourselves, our colleagues, and our students. So a university that's not interested in what's true or false, facts or fiction, is a completely different university than has existed since Bologna. And with Hannah Arendt wrote, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, i.e. the reality of experience, and the distinction between true and false, i.e. the standards of thought, no longer exist. So this is like a way to move us away from experience to an experiments, observation of nature, thought and rational thinking, logos, which makes us susceptible to totalitarian rule. And then our school is redesigning itself, and we're going to have 4 associate directors. One of teaching, one of research, one of extension, because we're a land-grant college. Do you know which one's going to be involved in hiring, tenure, and research? I mean, hiring, tenure, and promotion?
Yeah, oh yeah, I can guess, but tell
What?
us. Hmm?
Well, I only told you that there's three associate directors. I told you there was four. The fourth one is the associate director of faculty development, inclusion, and equity.
Yes, we've seen
And
this.
that's the one.
Yeah,
So we're marginalizing teaching, research, and extension
yeah,
for social justice.
yeah.
Truly going away from any vision of the university up until May 2020.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a very threatening thing. Well, the threat is mutual, really, isn't it? Because you know, faculty should, I think, but they disappointingly often don't see this as an existential threat to what they are as an academic, after all. And of course, that kind of independence is something that's actually existentially threatening to administrations as well. And you know, one of the amazing things that I have seen through this is just how what do I want to say? How smoothly this kind of destructive philosophy has spread through our universities and basically taken them over to the point where the very point of having a university is under threat. I think it just becomes another sort of resource, well, claim of resources on the public and private purse, with really no attention to what the value of the university actually is. So, you know, is the value of the university social justice, or is it providing our society with a source of independent inquiry, which upon which you know, things like academic freedom are essential. You know, you can't have a value to the university without honoring those core values of academic freedom and objectivity and skepticism and so forth. And those things are under increasing threat in the universities. And you know, you've been carrying on this fight for some time. I've been looking at some of your writings. They go back to at least 2011, maybe even earlier. So when did you start first perceiving the basic threat that this administrative overreach is posing to the very point of the university? What was the eye-opening?
When I came to Cornell, I had a very dear friend and colleague named Carl Leopold. You may know him.
His name.
Plant physiologist, and started the Finger Lakes Land Trust here. He was always interested in the structure of science, and I'm not sure exactly. He's since passed away. He'd be probably 100 and a little bit more now. So he never wrote a grant in his life. Universities would give, I mean, the government would give some, or foundations would give some monies to universities, and they sort of spread it around a little bit. And then he saw all that change, and he would write papers about where is science going and what's the effect of the money on that, and we talk about that. So he made me very much aware of what was going on. But frankly, Cornell was not big into the money when I came. When, Dave Call was the dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Science, and when I was interviewing with him, he asked me, how big a lab would you want? And I said, you're probably not going to want to hear this, but I wouldn't want a lab that's any bigger, that's so that the students that graduate wouldn't get the academic jobs that they're looking for. And he said, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. So I would say you never hear somebody say that now.
No, no, the more graduate students, the better, yeah.
Although very few graduate students are going into academia,
Yeah.
Which is understandable.
Yeah, well, we're subsidizing this overproduction of PhDs, really, and that's one of the pernicious things of this ethic of productivity that we all seem to be working under right now. But you mentioned the word implicit bias a little while ago. Well, maybe you didn't. Maybe
With omics, yeah.
yeah. But this notion that you can't remove bias altogether from the scientific enterprise because we are, after all, human beings who bring biases into it. One of the things that has kind of struck me about what's going on is that there's a new bias being introduced here, and you address this in some of the letters that you've written to administrators in opposition to the trend, and you mentioned several times critical race theory, which of course is the justification for a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives coming in and actually usurping some of the traditional values that academics have, traditional and unique values that academics have. But there's an implicit bias in there, isn't it? That there's necessarily this kind of class system of oppressors and oppressed, and there's no shortage of categories of oppressed individual or oppressed groups that are coming in, and that the whole dynamic of it is driven by this necessary conflict, necessary from the point of view of critical race theory, conflict between these different classes, and that just seems so destructive a philosophy to the very enterprise of science. And do you think that critical race theory has been driving this? Has it been explicitly expressed by the parts of the administrators, or is it just implicit? Tell us more about how you've been carrying on this fight against critical race theory at Cornell.
Two of the best books I've read in the past month or so were by Jonathan Rauch, The Constitution of Knowledge and Kindly Inquisitors. And I read the Constitution of Knowledge first, and then I couldn't wait to read Kindly Inquisitors, which was written in 1994. Constitution of Knowledge just came out. And I was amazed how much critical race theory essentially was going on outside the sciences in universities that he read about, that I was just unaware about. I just thought you couldn't tell jokes anymore.
Yeah.
That was the extent of, I lived in Japan, I came back here, and before I know it, you just couldn't tell any jokes due to political correctness. And so what I see in the sciences now is just as deep as it's been in the social science and humanities. As a matter of fact, if the associate director of faculty development, equity, and inclusion is going to be the overarching administrator for hiring, tenure, and promotion, in essence, plant science will be a social science.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So prospective students, faculties, investors, everybody should realize it wouldn't be the hard natural sciences that they might expect from the words, but it will be the soft social sciences. And I hope we don't go that way. But
yeah, and just from my perspective, the future actually looks pretty bleak. I don't know how you get around this nexus of money and power that's actually driving this, but you've described the modern university as salvageable. I wonder if you could tell us what the source of your optimism.
Yeah.
What you think we should be doing to reverse this?
So I have hope, and I have to give the reason for my hope.
Yes.
So I do work with some incredibly wonderful and brave people here at Cornell. A lot of places there may be one faculty member, like one David Bray or one Charles Nagy at a place, but here we actually have a few. We have Bill Jacobson, who has a blog, Legal Insurrection. Yes. We have Barry Strauss, Rick Geddes, and Don Kenkel, who just recently brought in Jay Bhattacharya to talk with David Chamois in a program that was called The Pandemic: What We Got Right, What We Got Wrong, and What's Next. Almost the title should be the title for anything. Look at the value and the limitations of what we did. We have Richard Bensel, who's really who realized that when Nixon opened China, that not only was there a chance of democracy going to China, but there was a chance of authoritarian rule coming to the United States. So he's fighting for free speech and academic freedom in Cornell's global hubs. The administration does not like this. So I'm surrounded by wonderful, courageous professors that are living up to their title.
Yeah, I mean, we saw an example of that. You and I met in person just about, I guess it was about a week ago or 10 days ago at a debate that was sponsored by the Cornell Free Speech Alliance, of which you're a part, between Stephen Koonin and Robert Sogolo about climate change, a very emotive, ideology-driven discussion that's happening in our society. And I thought it was a wonderful debate. I really enjoyed it. It was exactly what you would expect from a university debates, two opposing opinions. It was civil. It was there wasn't a lot of craziness that was going on, and yet apparently there was some opposition to this from administrators. So, okay, that's fine, but are we going to be sort of relegated to an underground experience where we kind of keep this flickering flame alive, or are we actually going to be able to reverse these pernicious, actually administration and money and power-driven changes in the university that are just destroying it, in my opinion? What do we do?
So, no administrator. I asked almost every administrator if they would give some opening remarks about Cornell being a place where you can have an open and civil debate on contentious issues, so everybody can learn and develop critical thinking skills in the process. Everybody happened to be busy that day. So I'm not going to say they gave me a hard time, but I'm going to say that they were all busy. Maybe next time, because next time they won't be busy.
I think you broke up there a little bit. I don't know if it was my end or your end, but could you just repeat about the last 10 seconds?
All the administrators were too busy to give opening remarks, and next time, and I hope there's going to be a next time, there'll be another debate, and they'll say, it's really nice for Cornell, who says one of our core values is free expression, that we actually come out and introduce the speakers on a contentious subject who are debating civilly.
Were the administrators just too busy, or did they actually take steps to kind of?
No. The administrators did nothing to stop this, and I applaud them for. I actually think it took courage to do nothing to stop it.
Yeah.
I truly do. Now, there was some faculty that wouldn't recommend to their students nor promote the event because it was sponsored by a conservative think tank. So that truly is putting politics over the search for truth and critical thinking. Now, the Steamboat Institute makes no bones about the fact that they're a conservative think tank. But their Campus Liberty tour for debates is completely fair. They wanted to do everything in their power to assure the most fair debate possible that everybody that the best turnout would be a 50-50 turnout for on whatever issue it is. And they really, they're actually standing up for what the university should be, for free expression, civil debate, and critical thinking.
Well, there's hope out there, as you have said. Some of us are, I think, range different spots on the bleakness optimism scale. I think you're more close to the optimistic side than I am, but I can see certainly that there is a cause for optimism. But the most troubling thing to me in this whole debate is that not just at Cornell, but the advancement of these kinds of destructive ideologies are dismayingly coming from our colleagues, and who I would hope would know better, but apparently not. And so did any faculty share with you their motivation for not promoting something like this? Was it just that, I mean, was it explicitly anti-conservative, or what explanations have your colleagues given you for not supporting an open debate about something?
Actually, the one person that was skeptical of the word liberty in the Liberty Tour in the Steamboat Institute, because he hadn't heard about it before, actually came and encouraged his students. But there were other people that I didn't speak to face that I learned.
Yeah. So it sounds like collegiality and face-to-face was the way to turn some minds around there.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. You know, I want to bring up, there's somebody named Daryl Davis, who's one of the advisors of FAIR. And it would have been a dream come true for me to bring him, I'm going to cry, to Cornell this spring. It didn't work out. But he was, when he was 10 years old, he was marching with the Cub Scouts, following the route that Paul Revere rode. And when I was a Boy Scout, I marched that same trail. And people started throwing rocks and bottles at him. And this Cub masters or den mothers came and protected him, and and took him home. And he asked his parents, why do these people hate Cub Scouts? And they told him, I don't think it was Cub Scouts, it was only you they were throwing things at, and you were the one black kid there. And they told him about racism, and he said, what's this racism business? A 10-year-old kid couldn't wrap his head around it. But for his life, his essence became the wanting to understand, how can you hate somebody you don't even know? So he went off to college, learned how to play the piano, played with Chuck Berry and B.B. King and Bo Diddley and Jerry Lee Lewis, and he had his own band. And one day this white guy came up to him and said, where did a black man learn to play the piano like Jerry Lee Lewis? and Daryl Davis said, this music actually comes from black culture, and Jerry Lee Lewis, who I know, that's how he learned it. And the guy says, nah. And he says, yeah, really, and nah. Well, anyhow, they became friends. And this white guy was actually a member of the Klan. And as they became friends, they learned about each other. So face-to-face talking and friendship. The guy quit the Klan, gave his robe to Daryl Davis, and then Daryl Davis said, oh, now I can figure out how people hate those that they don't know. And he went out individually, met so many Klan members that over 200 had quit the Klan and given him their robes. So yeah, face-to-face contact, being able to speak, and be able to speak honestly. So that's not being afraid to speak, not being afraid to make a mistake or say the wrong word, which DEI causes people to be so afraid to speak honestly, especially when the meaning of words changes by the day. By the way, do
Yeah.
you know what a woman is?
I am a biologist, but
Yeah, me
so
too.
yeah, yeah. Well, one hopes that the future lies in the people who believe in conversation rather than the people who want to suppress it. And
Yes.
on that note, I think should we go to the Q&A and the questions so that you
Okay,
can
so do I click on that?
well, I can read them out, and
Okay.
I think you're able to see them
Okay.
as well. So, just going through the chat boxes for right now, there are a couple of interesting things. We had some comments about indirect cost rates, and Joseph Licavoli says it's a 79% indirect cost rate, so that gives you an idea of the range that we're talking about. Uh, Borgogne says, isn't it partially true that students at public universities are the subjects of research in the form of data mining? I'm not sure there's a distinction to be drawn between that and private universities, but maybe Borgogne can elaborate perhaps on that, because I'm not quite sure how to approach that question. But
Yeah, I don't
Joseph,
know either.
yeah, yeah. So Joseph Licavoli also weighs in. He says he's a metallurgist, a great deal of sympathy for those studying human systems. It's like me trying to test a metal that can change its identity when it finds out it's being tested, which is, you know, I often said not to put the focus on me, but when you're dealing with the behavior of assemblages of little organisms, like even termites, you ultimately confront the fact that, well, these things have minds of their own, and then, how do you study scientifically a phenomenon that has a mind and can actually bias the experiment in ways that you might not be able to account for? I'm sure you've had this with some of your work in plant science, where plants seem to have a mind of their own as well.
Do you know that action potentials in single cells were first discovered in plants?
Yes, I do. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. But our listeners may not know that. Why don't you tell us a bit more?
oh, I wish I brought a. There's
Yeah.
some cells that are like this big. So
Yes.
before the giant axon was discovered in squid,
Uh,
Curtis and Cole stuck electrodes into Nightella cells
yeah.
and discovered the regenerating action potential.
Yeah. 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 So plants are cognitive beings as well, apparently. So moving through the chat, here's someone who knows you, David Bray. Says, "Hi, Randy. It's David Bray. Of course, the school is not perpetuating this nonsense. The social justice crowd needs to retreat back into the grievance studies department and let the university get back to its telos, fighting alongside you, my friend." And so
It's also David's birthday today.
Oh,
So happy birthday.
happy birthday, David. Thank you for this. But what caught my eye is saying, of course, the school is not perpetuating this nonsense, and the nonsense may still be perpetuated independent of the good intentions of the faculty and the people who are on your side. It's really a kind of a power struggle, isn't it?
I wrote so many emails to the what my friend Tom Shorgaff calls the Magnificent Seven administrators above me,
Hmm.
and about why we shouldn't have mandatory critical race theory. And my point is essentially, if it's postmodern thought and it's not based on truth, and we've already discussed that my school has no need for truth.
Hmm.
Social justice is the top priority, then that just has no place in a university. Although I'm with Jonathan Haidt, who says, the university, if it wants to choose social justice, so be it.
Hmm.
Say it. So
Yeah.
there's truth in advertising, or post-truth in advertising. But
Hmm.
don't confuse it with a place to search for truth and learn how to do critical thinking.
Yeah. 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 So Joseph Ligaboli is back, and he says, to see where this is coming from, just look to the HU departments. I'm not sure what HU stands for, but lots of Marxist Leninist, Maoist individuals with big chip on their shoulders there. Anyone can read the rest of the discussion, but this does illustrate kind of an interesting phenomenon. You know, the so-called grievance studies departments have been you know, building up and so forth, and increasing divisions, you know, between different kinds of aggrieved groups, if you will. And these have always kind of been derided from, or ignored, if you will, by people in the sciences and more traditional academic departments. You know, so they will never get jobs and this sort of thing. It's they're wasting their money, but really the joke has been on us, because it's been, you know, those departments have been the source of most of the growth of administrative bloat in our universities, and they've gone from these supposedly obscure departments into positions of real power in the university. And so, you know, is that your perception of what's been going on here? I mean, what's, you know, what's been, I keep coming back to the dynamic that's driving people with this philosophy, if you will, into these positions of power, where we academics have been taught totally unaware of what's been developing there.
So I think calling them grievance studies is correct. And if our school starts choosing people based on identity politics, basically, we'll be a department of grievance studies. We won't be a science department anymore. Yeah. I mean, that isn't to mean that people can't do science, but whenever you select for one thing, you select against another. Mm-hmm. And that's there's very few exceptions to that rule. Yeah. And the grievance studies actually really bother me. As I told you, I have hope. And so with grievance, and when you're a scientist, you have to have hope. Mm-hmm. And with all the experiments and observations, you have to have hope. And maybe even gratitude. And the grievance studies is the opposite. It's just a case study in ingratitude. And actually on this, I want to say that something that Cornell did right is they brought back the Lincoln bust that had been canceled.
Oh, okay.
And I would actually like to see a plaque of Lincoln's second inaugural next to that bust, where he says, with malice towards none and charity to all, which would be the opposite of today's grievance studies.
Yes.
And I think that's a good thing to make clear. I feel that the grievance studies are almost no different than going back to 1963 Mississippi and just reversing roles. Mm-hmm. And very few people would want to defend the tactics of 1963 Mississippi. As a matter of fact, we have a stained glass window in Sage Chapel here. I have all my students go take a picture of, with Mickey Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman, three of the freedom fighters. Mickey Schwerner was a graduate of Cornell University. Mm-hmm. So when I do talk about skin color, I bring in that window.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's go to some of our other comments. I do want to get to the Q&A, but there are lots of fascinating questions in the chat as well. Drew asks, how do you think DEI admins can take a more pro-human approach with less division? You know, we've mentioned that one of the things that's driving this is critical race theory, which is built upon division, not unification. So how do you get to convert the mind? How do the sciences, to use a phrase, colonize the minds of most DEI administrators and implant our ideas in there?
Here's my prescription. That Martha Pollack called up FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. asked to,
Pollock is the president of Cornell, right?
President of Cornell,
Yes.
asked to talk to the director and say, I personally would like to bring Daryl Davis to Cornell University and fund it and make him available to 1,300 people that can attend in person to see the pro-human approach. By talking to people, you get them to understand. Actually, I mentioned Constitution of Knowledge, Jonathan Rauch's book, that he fought for gay marriage. And he realized when he started fighting for gay marriage that if you tell people you're bigoted, it wasn't a way to win hearts and minds. But if they got to know him or other gay people or couples, he could win them over. And it's just a tried and true technique.
Yeah. The important aspect of that is, of course, being willing to talk to others. And you've written some things about, I think you've already mentioned them, but the one I was impressed by was, I think you mentioned the person who was a former Klan member, for example, who actually had a conversation with a woman whose kids in school were suffering from the same kinds of biases that this man's white children were facing, and it's just an amazing story. It's if people want to find it, you can look up in Randy Wayne's World with the link at the very beginning. But our administrators really open to it. You've sent me some email threads and some discussions, and they've been completely unresponsive. And the one response you got was actually kind of dismissive, I thought. So how do you breach that wall? That to me is the crucial aspect of the optimism that you express.
Okay, so I said Cornell is salvageable.
Yeah.
I don't think Harvard is salvageable.
Okay.
And Cornell students often think of themselves as students that couldn't get into Harvard. I think this is our opportunity to say Cornell is so much better than Harvard because we're not a social justice college, university. We're here for the search for truth. We're here to talk to people, to have free expression, to have open dialogue, open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, constructive disagreement in order to find out how to make a better world from true reality and facts. And I like this quote of C.S. Lewis. We all want progress, but progress means getting nearer to the place you want to be. And if you have taken a wrong turning, then to go forward does not get you any nearer. If you are on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man. And I sent that in a letter to President Pollock. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that the president, the vice president, the trustees say, you know something? This sounded like a good idea after George Floyd was killed, but it's not. If I ask my students what percent of the time can they express themselves on campus, and it's between 25 and 50% of the time. So 50 to 75% of the time, they just have to keep their mouths shut, which means you can't talk to somebody honestly and come up with better ideas and better understanding. So if the trustees and the administrators really do want to make that change for people understanding people, then they'll make a turnaround. And America's a very forgiving country. If you say, okay, we made a mistake. We thought we were doing the right thing. It was terrible what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd. It was terrible. And it was terrible that those people stood around and watched. And we thought we were doing something good, but maybe we made a mistake.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I'm going to put my pessimist hat on again. Certain groups of people, administrators among them, are very reluctant to admit that they've made mistakes, and that's my worry. So,
They can become a hero by admitting they made a mistake. They'll become a hero among the American public. I truly believe.
you bet. I think that's actually right. So, coming to the Q&A now. I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to, we may not be able to get to all of these, but please send me or Randy your questions and we'll try to have them answered if we don't get to them. But this is from Steve. He asks if you'd comment on the Stanford law situation and if there are any parallels that have happened at Cornell.
Actually, I do want to say a positive thing about Stanford law is they're going to have, it just came out today, I believe, that the law students are going to be required to take a free speech day, half day. And I think America is the best country in the world. Shoot me, but geez. And we have a First Amendment, and it helps make us a great country. And people don't understand enough about civics anymore. So I'm glad Stanford's going to do that. We've had our shouting down problems here, like in Stanford, and Coulter was shouted down recently. I was shouted down in a faculty meeting for presenting some free speech stuff, mosquito bites. And but the Cornell Free Speech Alliance has written a letter to Martha Pollack requesting that the incoming students also get training in free speech. And Purdue University and FIRE and NYU have some great programs. Learn the importance of free speech.
Yeah, green shoots that are hopeful out there. And of course, we hope that those green shoots will flourish. And a lot of that depends upon the motivations, the goodwill, if you will, of administrators who actually understand the unique role that the university plays and the unique role that academic freedom plays in imparting value to that institution. And that, of course, is the ongoing worry, isn't it?
So another reason that I'm hopeful is the administrators they have no defense, no analytical, constructive, rational logos to defend DEI.
Yeah.
So if they can't use university people are supposed to use their brains to defend it, I guess they really don't believe in it.
Yeah. We've had this issue with another debate that's coming up also under the auspices of free speech alliances. There's another group, the MIT Free Speech Alliance, which is going to explicitly consider this question, and the question is, should DEI academic programs be abolished? And the people who were organizing that were very forthcoming, in my opinion, in asking MIT administrators to come on and defend that position. Not that they should be abolished, but to defend the intrusion of this kind of woke ideology into the institution, which should be science and technology after all. But they wrote to 90-something administrators asking them. That's how many people are involved in the DEI thing at MIT, and not a single one of them offered to come on. And I doubt that any of those will be admonished for not doing this. I doubt that, and you've seen in your own experience that administrators feel quite free to ignore you when you bring these questions up. And That's a bit troubling.
Okay, they can ignore me. That's okay.
Hmm.
But they're going to have to live with people knowing that they do not have the ability to defend their own position.
Yeah.
So that the more I can make that public,
Hmm.
the better. So a university of people that can't use their words,
Hmm.
that can't use their brains. I'm not even going to say mind. We're not sure if it's there. So show us it's there. Defend your position. And I actually want to say another thing that gives me hope is the college fix helps bring out all these things that are happening, as well as the babbling beaver and the flickering beacon, and at Cornell here, the babbling bear. That shines a light on all these things that are happening. And the College Fix today has a beautiful story about the MIT debate. And they have pictures and they name names of the administrators that aren't showing up.
Yeah. Yeah. So a bit of naming and shaming going on there, which I think is going to be important. Going on to some other questions, J.R. Scott asked in the Q&A, Randy, in your experience, are graduate or undergraduate students more likely to oppose the truth-seeking telos of the university? Why do you think that's the case? And I guess the first question is, do you think they're more or less likely to oppose the truth-seeking telos?
Okay. Hi, JR, and thanks for doing the MIT debate. He's responsible for that.
Yes.
And I wrote a paper in the Chicago Thinker a couple years ago. And I tried to send it to some liberal places, and I asked my university if they would shop it around, and there was no interest anywhere. And it was called Science and Soros, Critical versus Manipulative Thinking. And the reason I wrote it is Karl Popper wrote a book called The Open Society and Its Enemies. And he talked about the importance of free speech to get to the best outcome. And he compared it with science, how you're freely communicating to get to the best outcome. Whether you're communicating with the organism you're studying, whether you're communicating with other sciences, peer reviewers, et cetera, and how important an open society is in science and society. And actually, I have a quote of George Soros. So George Soros's foundation is called the Open Society Foundation. He took a course with Karl Popper, and because of that, he named his foundation, the Open Society Foundation. And George Soros wrote, I discovered a flaw in the concept of open society. Popper was mainly concerned with the problems of understanding reality. He argued that, and I quote, only democracy provides an institutional framework that permits reform without violence, and so the use of reason in politics matters. But this approach was based on a hidden assumption, namely that the main purpose of thinking is to gain a better understanding of reality, and that was not necessarily the case. The manipulative function could take precedence over the cognitive function. Indeed, in a democracy, the primary objective of politicians is to get elected and to stay in power. This rather obvious insight raised some additional questions about the concept of open society. How could Popper take it for granted that free political discourse is aimed at understanding reality? And even more intriguingly, how could I, who gave the manipulative function pride of place in the concept of reflexivity, follow him so blindly? So here, the open society of George Soros is the opposite of Karl Popper's open society. Critical thinking for Karl Popper is replaced by manipulative thinking of George Soros, and that has taken over the university. So to answer your question, I gave the paper to my department chair at the time, and he said, I read that like 5 or 6 times, and I realize our graduate students don't know how to think. So would you consider offering a course in philosophy of science? I said, actually, I would love to. But I gave him my omics paper, which is an epic satire, and I said, but be careful what you wish for. So read this first before you ask me. He hasn't asked me again.
Oh.
So I think graduate students don't take so many classes anymore like they used to, because essentially they're acting as technicians, working, as I said before, they're not working on their own projects, they're working on others. So I don't see the graduate students so much looking for the truth-seeking telos. In our Heterodox Academy campus community, we just had a graduate student join. So hopefully I'll see some more graduate students that are looking for that truth-seeking telos, but I don't see it in general around me.
Yeah. In response to that, Adrienne W. Popped in and says, yes, do that, meaning your philosophy of science course. I've only had my PhD since 2016 and only got that lesson in philosophy of science during my PhD. And I can say that her experience, certainly I've seen in many, many other students, you start talking about the philosophy of why you think the way you think, why are you doing this? It's almost a revelation to them, or a clamming up, depending upon the student's personality and attitudes. Yeah, that's I just throw in that observation. And let's see, we've spoken about how we can persuade DEI directors to take a more human, not necessarily humane approach to things, although I think they go together. We've discussed several aspects of this. Sean Hartley, for example, do you really believe there is sufficient interest or willingness? This is a big part of our conversation in response to another question amongst academics and administrators to be able to shift the course away from identity Marxism. It seems there's either too much buy-in or unwillingness to stand against it. Your thoughts?
I'm going to say at top 20% of the people in the university, across the whole university, are Marxists or big into DEI. I mean, Ibram X. Kendi, who is the founding father of our whole DEI movement here, his book was a campus reading book and was given out by Martha Pollack free of charge to anybody who wanted it. Says to be an anti-racist, you have to be an anti-capitalist. And the BLM is also, in their goals, are very Marxist, and frankly very hateful to whites. I'm talking about UV light in my class on Tuesday, and the function of melanin, in either blocking UV light from reaching certain cells, and then I go into the whole politics of race, and I have a poem by one of the co-founders of BLM that talks about the evilness of white people. I think it's toxic. I think the How to Be an Anti-Racist is a toxic book. I think Judith Katz and Delgado Stefancic and Robin DiAngelo, they're really toxic books. Reading through them, and actually Ibram X. Kendi says that he realized the educational mission to change minds was a failed policy, if not a suicidal policy. That his goal was policy, to be an activist, to have policy, power and policy change, not changing minds. And if we go into this place, we're going to have to advertise ourselves as we're a place that's interested in social justice, not changing minds, but just changing policy. Don't come to Cornell if you want to learn to better your mind. We're not going to be changing it.
Yeah.
And actually, I want to add hearts and minds to that, because I think it's actually very important to be able to feel and think and integrate those together.
Okay, well, we're approaching the end of our time. Randy, this has been a fascinating discussion. Do you have a general wrap-up message for our attendees?
I'm going to say something totally unrelated because we didn't get a chance to talk about this. So I do some research on the nature of light, and
Yes.
everybody's heard that light's either a particle or a wave. On Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, it's a particle. Tuesdays, Thursdays, say it's a wave or something. So I have a model of light that's made out of two particles, and as they move, you can see their wave-like
Yeah.
character.
Uh-huh.
So I brought a visual aid for that.
I've read that this two-particle model of light. Someone said it was a fringe theory.
That's right.
In what way is it a fringe theory?
Because it gets deleted from Wikipedia every time somebody writes something about it.
Yeah,
But actually, nobody can find anything wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you mentioned in another webinar about shut up and calculate.
Mm-hmm.
So David Merman was the person that said that was here at Cornell, and I went to talk to him about my model of light and my alternatives to relativity. He just said, drop it right now. He can't find anything wrong.
Yeah.
But relativity is so beautiful. Just drop it right now.
Yeah. Speaking of that, just a couple of practical things. Some of the Paul Erickson, for example, he would like possibly a list of the books that you just mentioned. I'm not quite sure how we do that in the last couple of minutes that we have, but maybe you could just mention by name what the.
I think I mentioned. Okay. Karl Popper, The Open Society and Its Enemies.
Right. Okay.
Although Karl Popper's a little difficult to read. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say, and also Hannah Arendt, mm-hmm. The Origin of Totalitarianism. Yeah. She's very hard to read. Yeah. I mean, it takes every sentence you have to think about. Yeah. And she's the one that said thinking is dangerous in her book, The Life of the Mind. Yeah. But Jonathan Rauch actually is a great writer, and he covers a lot of the material that they cover in The Constitution of Knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I highly recommend that. And Kindly Inquisitors is also good, but The Constitution of Knowledge a little more up to date. And actually reading that, I would say, he has like a bias on this, which made me question my own biases mm-hmm. on this and that. So it's a wonderful book to as Hannah Arendt says, to be by yourself. They're talking to yourself as you as you read those wonderful sentences he wrote.
Yeah. To which I would just add another book along these lines, a fabulous book by David Kaiser called How the Hippies Saved Physics. And he talks about some of the dynamics. That's where I became familiar with the phrase "shut up and calculate," because that was that sort of drove these very innovative ideas of John Bell into the wilderness, basically, only to be recovered like 30 years later. So
David Kaiser also wrote a book called The Suburbanization of Physics.
Yes.
A book of paper that was really excellent and described what we all might think physicists are like or what physics is. Compared to what it has become. Yeah. And I can't remember where it was published, but the title was The Suburbanization of Physics. I asked him if he'd write a book about the urbanization of biology, dealing with omics. It's on his list.
What did he say? How did he respond?
He said he's been thinking of that. Well, that was a long time ago, so he hasn't.
Okay.
In the meantime.
takes a while to write a book, as we all know. So, so let's just wrap up here. We're very near the end of our time. Let me just put in a little plug for the next Restoring the Sciences. Will be a special face-to-face interview with Heather McDonald and Pat Kambabati, who are going to be the one side of this MIT Free Speech Alliance debate. That will be at 11 a.m. on April 4th, and we hope that you'll join in and participate in what should be I think, a fascinating discussion with them, and a prelude to what's going to be an outstanding debate, I think, similar to the one that Randy was just mentioning with the Steamboat Institute, which was a sponsor of the Cornell debate on climate change. So do come back, and Randy, it was just a fascinating discussion. I've enjoyed chatting with you, enjoyed meeting you very, albeit briefly, and giving us a window into the thinking of a professor's professor. So, Randy, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for that compliment, but thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this. It's wonderful.
Well, it's been my privilege. Okay, so on behalf of the National Association of Scholars, we'll close it out here, and we'll see you, I hope, on April 4th. Randy, thanks again.
Thank you, Scott.
Bye.
Bye.